Hi, I'm Heidi Rader. I'm with UAF Cooperative Extension Service, and I'm here today at the Southeast Alaska Farmers Summit in Petersburg with David and Conor Lendrum. They're with Landscape Alaska and have a plant nursery in Juneau, Alaska. So we're going to talk a little bit about their business and what they grow and any tips for possible new greenhouse owners here in Alaska. So what got you excited about growing plants and starting a nursery?
I personally grew up in this business since I was a small child. My mother had an organic U-pick farm in California, and I went to work in a nursery when I was 14. And I've done that kind of work for all my life. And I had a ranch in the mountains in Ecuador. I raised green onion plants there, and I came back to the United States, and through some evolutions ended up back in Portland. Met a woman. We spent the summer in Elfin Cove, and as we were leaving, we looked around, and she said, "Boy, I think they need a nursery here." And I said, "Well, if they really wanted a nursery, they probably have one by now." But the image never left her. So a couple years later, there we were in Juneau, Alaska, setting up our own nursery business.
Wow, what a story.
How it goes.
And I would say many folks in small villages or towns would like a nursery, and it's a great service to have a nursery because you want to get those plants started early, and it's not the easiest thing to do.
And a lot of places, say a small town has a desire for 20 rose bushes in the summer. They don't have the capacity to have all that happening, but they can call me up and say, we'd like to have that, so I'll add that to my product list the next year, and then the following season, send it out on a small plane.
What is the most popular thing you sell?
By far, the most popular thing is bleeding hearts. Both for young gardeners beginning in and for more established people looking back at their traditional homes, bleeding hearts is the winner, hands down. A lot of what we do is in the more kind of commercial landscaping work too, and in that case, we try to fit the stuff into the surrounding environment. So a lot of what we do also requires small native plant propagules. So there's a big chunk of that too.
So for remediation type
and
work?
If you want to have your dental clinic, when you buy the land and scrape everything away and build your building there, it's not hospitable. So you have to put something back there, and you have to arrange the soils and put back some kind of berry bushes and small trees and things like that.
And my mother, the landscape architect in the business, her master's thesis was about saving that native ground cover after land has been cleared for construction and then reintegrating it into the designed landscape around the building. So we also do that where instead of all that beautiful muskeg and devil's club and blueberry just getting thrown into a pile to decompose, gets healed back into the land with maybe a few more plants added, a few deliberate rock placings, and then it's almost this cultivation and care of the natural landscape that you have sort of damaged in order to have your development.
Oh, that's great.
Another thing about that is a lot of those native landscapes, they're 2,000 years old. So she's able to cut them up with a chainsaw, pick them up with an excavator, put them on a truck, take them over and lay them back down again.
Wow.
And have it start back up again. It's pretty impressive.
That is, and that's, I've read about that type of landscaping, and it's just so much more resilient than going in and planting annuals or that type of thing too.
Absolutely. And plus it you might think it's going to be exactly the same as it was when it lays down, but you've picked it up from a particular environment and laid it down in another environment. It's going to adapt to that.
Right.
The things that were perhaps dormant in that soil mass are going to come up and come back into fruition.
And it's an ecosystem, it's a lot more resilient.
Undisturbed ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right, and that means that you don't have to worry about like, imported plants that can't handle the local pests or weather or like anything like that. And, like he was talking about, the existing but dormant plants in that disturbed plant area, the landscape does get disturbed naturally. And there are plants that have evolved to respond and thrive when there's disturbances, like things that pop back right after a fire, for example. And so sometimes like this whole other side of the ground comes out after you shake it up a bit.
Another nice thing about that too is when those pieces are put together, like pieces of a pattern, there's no place for invasive plants to get started. So one of the big problems with commercial landscaping is managing all, because you've taken away everything, and the things that are going to naturally reoccur are going to be mostly weedy kind of invasive species that are difficult to manage. So if you put it all back into native sod, it's not going to happen.
So is that a big portion of your business?
Depends year by year.
Okay.
That's the one that we always love.
Yeah.
We
you
jump
feel
on
good
that
about
anytime
that.
we can, right?
Yeah, that's great. What are some of the other popular kind of bread and butter crops that you sell at your greenhouse?
Well, Southeast Alaska is a great place to grow rhododendrons. And we made contact with some rhododendron growers 45 years ago and have been bringing those particular species and varieties into Southeast all this time.
Oh, okay.
And so you'll look
all over Southeast?
All over Southeast.
Oh,
And so
okay.
there are what they call cast iron hybrid rhododendrons. And any town you go to, any town in Southeast, you're going to drive down the street, there's going to be Nova Zembla rhododendrons that are kind of raspberry red. There's going to be English roseums that are kind of a lavender pink. And you're going to look at it and go, oh, I've seen that before.
Yeah.
And they are. They're magnificently suited to this climate.
Another thing too that's really interesting about having a retail nursery in Southeast Alaska is that there are certain plants that are so established here, even if they're not originally native here, that people have, like rhubarb is like in every town in Southeast Alaska. And, everyone who regularly cultivates and like pulls out, like will eventually have way more rhododendrons or rhubarb than they want.
Right.
And we have people who come to Landscape Alaska and say like, hey, I potted all of this. I don't have any room for it, sell it. And so we also sell a lot of rhubarb to people who don't have rhubarb in their yards, from people who have just dropped it off at our place because they don't have the room. They have enough that they can like harvest every year. And so there's also like this other very cool community element to it. That's fun.
Another one that's really interesting. Margaret developed a thing that she used kind of...
That's your wife?
Yes. Margaret Tharp's her name. And she developed a method of imitating the native landscape. And that's finding plants that grow kind of like the native muskeg kind of plants or slightly upland kind of plants. And you can buy those from growers that specialize in that kind of stuff. So there are, for instance, there is a variety of blueberry common from Nova Scotia to the Great Lakes. And it spreads underground with rhizomes. And if you plant that and get it started there, pretty soon it'll make a blueberry thicket that's a foot tall. That's, it's good for the native birds and pollinators. They all love that. It's a beautiful ground cover, and it's a fruiting ground cover, and it's going to grow together and choke out everything. So this is a really desirable pattern.
Interesting. And you sell that?
Sell it, contract for it, design for it, yes.
And do you know the species name?
Vaccinium angustifolium.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
Creeping blueberries.
Okay. I haven't heard of that.
And there's another one that does that really well that's native here, which is lingonberries, which is called low bush cranberry.
Right. And how big are those blueberries?
The blueberries themselves for that kind, about that size. Minuscule. Kind of
Interesting. So it's more of a ground cover is what you're...
If you ever go to the grocery store and you see packages that say organic wild blueberries, and you open them and look at them, that's what they are. And they harvest them with a rake. So they scrape them all off the plants in this rake and then separate the leaves off from them. But that's what they are. They're kind of like ball bearing size.
Okay. All right.
Interesting.
Great. I'll have to check those out.
What's my favorite? I know you were going to ask. My favorite are the new hydrangeas.
Okay.
Because they come into bloom from the latter part of the summer, and they start blooming in pale green. and ripen through white, pink, and then to dark red. And they're still in bloom when the snow comes.
Wow.
And they're a zone 2 plant. You can have them in a pot on your porch. I love that.
So what's your biggest challenge as a greenhouse owner in Southeast Alaska?
Well,
Or challenges?
the biggest, most recent one was the last couple of years of incredible snowfall, collapsing greenhouses. That was a very difficult thing to hit. And the other one is that we're in a really dynamic environment. And last year, we got a double whammy. We got 2 insect pests exploding into the wild environment. And so there you are with your crops, and suddenly you have no idea what's going on. And the spruce tip moth and the hemlock algid both attack the conifer trees. And so you could look out, the conifer trees are dying and mad. And it took a while to figure out what was happening. But that's also, all that's going to move into anybody's cultivated crop. And that's way beyond our control.
Wow.
Also, long winters where the ground's frozen. And since we're a landscape design installation business, that's also a big challenge. Just making sure that in a relatively short season, you make enough business to make it through the winter.
So what are your opening hours of the greenhouse?
I would say May 1st.
May 1st, and we finish up around Halloween.
Okay, so no house plants or hydroponics going on in the winter.
Not for us. No, that's way too large an investment and too much labor.
Are you able to take off and travel in the winter?
Well, remember, I work for the university.
Okay.
So I'm pretty much there, right? But occasionally we do go and look around.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone starting out in the greenhouse business, or what would you have told your younger self?
Had I paid more attention when I started, I really would have focused on the propagation of native plants. I tried several times to get it going, but couldn't get the funds organized for it. But now, 40 years later, there's a market for it. And had we developed the whole stream by then, I think that would be a really viable business alternative.
Interesting. Instead of hunting through all the plant catalogs of all the growers in Canada or the Pacific Northwest, and then looking for things that can live here, and then experimenting. Because sometimes you order things and you're like, we're really finding out if it can live here and be viable, versus propagating and breeding and getting to know the local varieties better. Would be cool.
And also, there's the other thing about this kind of environment is all around the world. There are places in Northern Europe, there are places at high altitudes in Asia, and there are places in Latin America that have similar kinds of climates. And looking and seeing places and seeing what's growing there would be a real, not just fun thing, but really, really useful.
And do you continue to experiment each year with new?
About 20 new things a year.
Okay. What are you excited to try this year?
There's a creeping anemone. It's Anemone nervosa, and it blooms real early. And it's common in the eastern part of Canada. And it's a white ground cover that would be about 8 inches tall, would bloom here end of April, beginning of May.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I think it would be really, really nice. And you could put that with crocus flowers and let that make a nice early spring ground cover.
And do you sell many bulbs, like tulips or?
We did at one time, but now it's become a promotion item for civic groups. So rather than be in competition, we encourage to support that.
Okay, great.
I like them, I think bulb crops are a fascinating thing.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your greenhouse?
Well, there are native rhododendron here, and they grow as a subshrub. And there's even a rhododendron that grows out in Glacier Bay, that grows as an underground stem and grows up, puts its stem up and puts a flower up every year. And if somebody was really interested, they could develop that into quite a valuable crop, I believe. So maybe some interested young person is going to do that.
Cool.
I'd also like to say that we are beginning our first online store for Landscape Alaska. So if you do live in Southeast Alaska and you don't have a nursery in your town, watch landscapealaska.com, and we're going to start shipping out plants to communities that don't have access to one in walking distance.
All over Southeast or
Yep.
statewide?
Just Southeast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Although if somebody wanted one from someplace else, I'm sure we could arrange it. But that's our focus, is on Southeast, things that are going to work in our communities.
Do you have a good selection of berries and fruit trees?
We have an okay selection of fruit trees. We usually get a couple apple trees in every year. Crab apple trees, that's not really for eating. Some cherry trees, but we have started selling honeyberries, and I love the honeyberries. They're incredible. They're like, the fruit's about 1.5 inches long. It's almost like a bean pod shape. It's really sweet, almost with like a Concord grape texture, like a nice thick jelly texture. And they're really delicious. And we also sell a good selection of gooseberries and currants. So we have a wider selection of like better fruit producing shrubs than we do trees, though we do have a few every year.
Yeah, because that can be really tricky to find greenhouses that will ship and then to find the right varieties too. So that's a
Fruiting
great
shrubs are a
service.
great thing for us here because they're incredibly productive, but even though if the wild animals come and eat them, they're not going to break them up like they do with an apple tree or a cherry tree.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this information about
Thanks, you too.
Landscape Alaska, and it sounds like you're a wealth of knowledge, and so check them out, Landscape Alaska.
Landscape Alaska.
We have a radio show on Saturday mornings
Okay, and what's
during
the
the
name
whole
of that?
growing season. Conversations with Alaskan Gardeners.
Okay,
It's on AM 800 and it comes
Very
out of
cool.
Juneau.
okay, awesome.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so
A
much.
great pleasure. Thank you.